Hello, welcome to my talk. Today I'm going to be telling you a story about how I learnt Python to buy a pair of shoes. So hopefully you're going to take some things away from this talk. You're going to know that learning is fun, failing is all part of learning, and a great way to learn is by building. These are the shoes that we're going to try and buy. These are the Yeezy Boost 350 version 2s, commonly referred to as the Breads because they are black and red. So our story begins here. This is the Keaton Auditorium at the University of Nottingham. I was a first-year maths student in 2016. Our lecturer came in at the start of the year and said, I know you're all here to learn maths, but all modern mathematicians must know programming. So there was a compulsory module where we had to learn MATLAB. That module has now been replaced with a Python module, and that should tell you everything you need to know about MATLAB. So fast forward to the end of my first year, I'd quite enjoyed this module. I'd done a bit of MATLAB and some coding problems, etc., etc. It came to results day, and I'd got some quite good grades. So I thought, maybe maths isn't where I want to go. Maybe I want to be a software engineer. How do I do that? What does that pathway look like? So I went onto Google. This was before ChatGPT because it was 2016, so I had to do it the old-fashioned way. And I Googled it, and it basically said, start off by doing a course, so, learn the basics like what's a variable, what's an if statement, etc. And then once you've kind of got that down, the best way to learn is by building something. So find a problem you're having in your life or something you're passionate about and learn by building. And that's a great way to get all the experience that you're going to need to be a software engineer. So I wanted to buy these pair of shoes. So the challenge was, can I write a piece of software to buy the shoes? Now, at the very beginning, I didn't know anything about computers or the internet, etc. So I thought, well, how do I buy a pair of shoes? I go onto a website and I move my keyboard and mouse at the most literal sense. I click on some stuff and eventually a pair of shoes ends up at my door. So this was the place I started. There is a module called PyAutoGUI, and what this allows you to do is automate keyboard and mouse movements. Now, this had a couple of issues. First of all, to click on stuff, you had to pass it XY coordinates. This meant that if anything moved about on the web page, that no longer worked, and the script would break. We also had these sleeps. We had to put in an arbitrary amount of seconds. Now, this was a problem because we're not the only ones trying to buy these pair of shoes. So if we are too slow, then we're not going to get them. They're going to sell out. So the faster we run, the better. Now, we're software engineers, so we like to work in an agile way. So this was iteration 1, and I've iterated a few different times. The second iteration was going directly to automating the browser. I use Selenium for this. I know this isn't the tool anymore, but again, back in the olden days, it was a great tool to use. This had a couple of improvements on the previous iteration. First of all, we could actually see and interact with the underlying HTML. So that meant instead of clicking an arbitrary kind of XY location, we could scan the HTML for a button that said View Product 1 and click it. This meant that if it moved, our script was still going to work. It also gave us this wait until function. So we could wait until something was on the web page before we clicked it. This meant that we didn't have to wait unnecessarily. And as we said, faster means we've got a better chance at securing these shoes. Now, the next step, I'd basically done a bit more research about how do computers actually talk to each other, and I learned about APIs. So why was talking to the API any faster? Well, when we were loading up a website, we had the actual request that we were trying to run. We also had a whole bunch of images. Obviously, this is the modern web, so you're tracked to everything you do, so you have to load a bunch of trackers. We were also loading 50 kilobytes of font on every page load, which is crazy. If we talk to the API directly, the request size was a lot smaller, and that allowed us to basically run a lot faster. So how do we do this in Python? We use the request library. So after some kind of poking around of the website, there was actually a two-step process for checking out your pair of shoes. First of all, there was a put request to this cart API. You gave it your product ID, your size, and it would return a JSON response. Within that was a checkout URL that was unique to your cart. You would send the post request with all the card details, shipping information, and a pair of shoes would arrive at your door, fingers crossed. So I had this script. Now, one issue that ended up being with this script is that it's synchronous. That wasn't inherently an issue, but this was the first kind of piece of software I'd written, and I got really excited because it was kind of working. So I went to all my housemates at university and I said, you know those shoes that we want to buy? Well, I've written a piece of software to do it for us. So obviously they all wanted to get in on that and also buy a pair of shoes with my software. Now, This would have been great if they were all technical, but they were not at all. Some of them could barely use a calculator. I wasn't going to try and explain to them how to set up a Python environment and end variables, etc., etc. So I just said I'd run it for them. Now, this is where the synchronicity became an issue, because the sixth housemate would have to wait for the first 5 housemates to check out before they got their chance, and this was unfair. So to solve this, we moved to an asynchronous way of doing it. So we replaced the request library with HTTPX. We pulled out the script running to this main function that said this was the add to cart and the checkout steps still. And this basically solved this synchronicity problem. It meant that all 6 attempts would go out at exactly the same time as soon as the shoes were released. So, did it work? Obviously we've put in all this effort, we've solved all these problems along the way. Did it work when it came down to it? No, obviously not. The Yeezy developers are far more competent than a first-year maths student who's just discovered what an API is. Now, some of you may be saying, but Isaac, you're wearing the shoes you're talking about right now. And you were saying, you're right. So how do we get here? Well, obviously in software, we think we need to automate everything. We don't. Sometimes you can just go and do it the old-fashioned way, the manual way, and actually that works just fine. So, a few months later, I woke up at 5 a.m, I stood outside a shoe shop in a freezing cold for an hour, and this is a photo of me at 6 a.m. with mine and my housemate's pair of shoes that we'd managed to buy. So a few key takeaways, bring it back. Hopefully you now know that learning can be fun. Failing is all part of the journey. You're going to learn so much whilst you do it, and a great way to learn software and many other things is learn by building something that is relevant to you. Thank you very much for listening.